back in the year 2000, Universal Pictures released the first ever full-length feature film adaptation of a Dr. Seuss story, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The Grinch was, well, not brilliantly received, but it did win over a decent number of fans, and I know I certainly liked it as a child, and it was a financial success that prompted the studio to create another live-action feature film, this time one of arguably Dr. Seuss's most famous book, The Cat in the Hat. This would, however, be the last ever live-action adaptation, as the author's widow was so appalled by the movie that she made certain to never allow another one like it to be made, which certainly suggests that something went wrong here, and as always, let's talk about that. While The Grinch still does have a lot of fans that will defend it, The Cat in the Hat is far less beloved, and in my experience, most people who do enjoy it kind of for the same reasons as B-movie. Like, they appreciate the strangeness and the internet memes, but maybe not so much the product as a whole. And that said, B-movie may be flawed, but it's certainly better than this train wreck as far as I'm concerned. The original Cat in the Hat was, like most Dr. Seuss works, a quirky picture book with a generally wholesome and very imaginative feel to it. It wasn't my favourite Dr. Seuss book growing up, that would probably be The Lorax, which we may get to eventually, but I still did like it, so much so that even as a child, I could tell the movie version wasn't very good. But looking back at it as an adult, wow, this movie is a lot more annoying than I remember. The film opens up with two children, Conrad and Sally, who live with their single mother Joan. While Joan spends most of her time at work as a real estate agent, Conrad spends most of his time just breaking the rules and making messes, to the point where their mother's boyfriend Larry is desperately trying to convince her to ship him away to military school. One evening, Joan has been tasked with hosting a dinner party for her co-workers by her extreme clean freak boss Hank Humberflube, and demands that the house be clean and pristine by the time she gets home from work. Shenanigans ensue, however, when a giant, hideous, uncanny valley cat creature, the titular character of course, shows up to cause an absolute metric ton of problems. His existence is not really explained, but his purpose is supposedly to teach the kids how to have fun, which unfortunately causes a huge mess, and also results in a crate-shaped portal to an alternate dimension opening up inside of the house, causing it to slowly morph into a surreal, slime-filled hellscape, which can only be stopped if the children retrieve the padlock for the crate, which has attached itself to the collar of their runaway dog. Now, the problem that a lot of people have with this movie is the humour, and it's easy to see why. While most children's movies have a tendency to add in the occasional joke for the adult audience, The Cat in the Hat is absolutely rife with adult humour and references, to the point where you'd think it was a parody of a kids' movie from an adult sketch show or something. Now, don't get me wrong, I am fine with the occasional adult joke or reference, but not only is there no subtlety here whatsoever, but this is a movie generally for very young children, not teens or tweens, based on a wholesome little piece of literature aimed mostly towards toddlers, making it all feel just a little bit tasteless. But that's not the only problem with this movie, not by a long shot. The works of Dr. Seuss are pretty well known for being very imaginative, particularly through all the creative, cute and quirky artwork. But this movie is none of those things. The cat, the fish, and especially Thing 1 and Thing 2 have really not translated well to live action, to the point where the cat is basically the practical effects equivalent to the cast of the Cats movie. Now, Jim Carrey as the Grinch proved that this sort of character design can work in live action, so there's really no excuse for it to look this bad here. But on top of the awful character design, the backgrounds and scenery aren't really much better. They may be bright and colourful, but at the same time, there's something incredibly bland about them. Despite it all being designed as light and whimsical, there's not a great deal of detail to the surroundings. They look incredibly fake, and the lack of a real personality to the setting only emphasises that. It's like adding too much salt and not enough spice to a dish, if you get what I'm saying. The bright colour and toy box-like visuals are overly obvious, but the lack of charm or real thoughtful detail makes it all just feel soulless and empty. However, while the visuals are again another big problem, they're far from the only problem. While I understand that this is a movie for very young children, the characters are just so unbelievably underdeveloped. Main character Conrad's only personality trait is being a troublemaker. The motivation behind his mischief is incredibly unclear. While troublemaking characters are commonplace in kids' media, usually it's shown that the character in question does have a good heart or is at the very least funny or clever, and their mischievousness is either a secondary flaw or an act of rebellion against an evil authority figure. Joan, however, is hardly a strict parent, and while Larry is an over-the-top evil stepfather figure, he's clearly not the source of Conrad's misbehaviour. It's kind of hard to root for a character whose only character trait is a desire to cause problems purely for the hell of it. His sister Sally certainly has more potential. She's a control freak, but rather than just being a cliched stick in the mud, she's actually a blunt, self-aware sycophant that could have been funny, maybe, had she been paired with a decent main protagonist.
It was my pleasure, Sally. Anything for my little princess?
Oh, I don't want to be a princess. In a constitutional monarchy, Parliament has all the real power.
And then there's the Cat in the Hat himself. His character is that he's really immature, annoying, and generally doesn't seem to care about anything. His purpose in the story is to teach the kids how to be fun, which half the time just involves him acting out unfunny character sketches. And it's one thing for him to cause more problems than he solves, but the real issue here is that he really doesn't seem to give a damn about how much he's screwing the kids over. In the book, the cat was a well-meaning character who just wanted to cheer up two bored kids, but ended up going too far with his games and making up for it by the end. Here, the cat's personality is just so inconsistent. One minute he's trying to teach the kids a lesson, the next he wants to ditch them and leave them to clean up his mess. In the book, the kids kicking the cat out is a sad moment because he was only trying to cheer them up and didn't mean to go too far. Here, when the kids kick the cat out, he can't even be bothered to remember their correct names. And above all else, God is he annoying. Like I said, he feels like a mocking parody of a wacky kids movie character. And he doesn't even stand out as especially wacky in the context of the movie anyway, because it's set in an already wacky and whimsical world with equally eccentric characters. The lack of a contrast makes him seem just more awkward than anything else. So, what about the story then? Well, it's pretty bare bones for the most part. The beginning revolves purely around the very basic plot of not making a mess, which completely whiplashes in the second half as the plot goes from keep the house clean to close the trans-dimensional portal that has fused the house with the wacky hell dimension. The real problem here is that the original book had a very simplistic plot, one that works perfectly fine for a children's picture book, but not so much for a full-length feature film. While other stories, like How the Grinch Stole Christmas or The Lorax, do have conflicts that can carry a movie, the Cat in the Hat conflict of cleaning up a mess just wasn't enough. So they had to raise the stakes, but did so in a method so weird that it ends up being vastly underdeveloped, since it feels as though it belongs in an entirely different story. So, if that's what went wrong, would there be a way to put it right? Well, for starters, make it animated. I'm not saying there isn't a way to make a live-action Dr. Seuss movie work, but generally, regardless of what you think of them as movies, I think most folks would agree that the animated movies do look a lot more visually appealing. Second, like I said, a key part of the Cat in the Hat story is that the cat is a wacky and whimsical character who meets two relatively normal children. The cat should have a more developed personality as happy and energetic, but well-meaning and mostly oblivious to the problems he's causing. And the kids, at least the main protagonist, work better as being good-natured and well-behaved, hence why the cat provides such a contrast in their lives. As for the story, well, okay, the idea of the crate opening up to reveal another world and fusing the real world with the imaginary fantasy world, while odd, is a decent enough basis for a story provided it's actually in focus throughout. In fact, if you want a more interesting and creative conflict, rather than having the dog with the key on its collar just run away into the neighbourhood, why not have the dog actually fall into the crate and have the movie revolve around having to traverse the cat's mysterious alternate world in order to retrieve the dog? That would be a lot more interesting, keep the stakes consistently high, and hell, maybe even the other world could feature a lot of shout-outs to the other, lesser-known Dr. Seuss works. Above all else, the movie would really need to stop trying to pander to adult audiences and actually develop a real identity outside of Mike Myers puts the story on pause to try to be funny. I think if there's a lesson to be learned from this movie, it's this. If you want to make a kids movie more appealing to adults, then the answer for how to do that is not automatically put in a whole load of adult references that the kids won't get. Especially not when the product in question is based upon a property aimed for such young children, as the dissonance will likely just be awkward and may confuse the overall identity of the movie. There are plenty of kids' movies out there that appeal to folks of all ages simply because they're well written and well developed. While in some cases this is because they do delve into more adult subject matters, in others, it really is just a case of being a lot of fun that doesn't neglect proper writing and characterization simply because of the old kids will watch anything excuse. Given the Grinch later got a full-length animated adaptation, which I still haven't seen so can't really comment on, I do have hopes that maybe one day an animated remake of this movie could actually be possible. At the very least, I'm fairly certain it would do a better job than this one. Because, well, at the end of the day, most people could. Thanks for watching the video. So, yeah, this movie was about as bad as I remember, but it was a lot more annoying than I remember it being. That said, ending this review has really gotten me thinking, given we've had far too many animated movies being remade as live action, can we please start doing the opposite at some point and start remaking live action movies as animated? I think there'd be a lot of potential there. Anyways, as always, like, share, subscribe and donate to me on Patreon if you can, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye.